If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this. Native Americans, what are your tribe's ghost stories, legends, or supernatural occurrences? Uktena. It's a legend about a horned snake in Jalagi, Cherokee. Legend. Uktena is said to be very large and round like a tree trunk, with horns on his head. The only way to wound him is to shoot at a singular spot on his forehead that emits bright light. It's similar to a diamond. If you defeat Uktena, you become a miracle worker. A great warrior. Yet, once you see the light of his forehead, you run toward it instead of trying to escape. Even to see Uktena sleeping is death. Not to the hunter, but to his family. My tribe talks about a beast called, rough translation here, the Flame Walker. Spirits who take the form of a small blue flame, that leads people into the swamps and bogs, where they eventually drown or otherwise vanish. Yes, they are basically will-o-wisps. Another are the water-faced hunters, again rough translation, and I am not heavily involved with my tribe these days. These creatures have a face that acts like a pool of water, reflecting the face of anyone who looks them in the eyes. They mercilessly hunt down the people who acknowledge them. The only way to avoid them is to not speak to, or others interact with a stranger unless you can see their face from the corner of your eye. We also have the more traditional skinwalker type legends, as well the Bogmen. My tribe is considered part of the Abenaki, but are actually a smaller sub-tribe. Basically, when it came down to it, there were not enough of the tribe to actually be considered a tribe anymore. Today we number fewer than 200, and only 8 of those are more than half-blooded. My bio father and his brother, as well as my paternal grandparents, are the last 4 full-blooded of my tribe. Dean from northern British Columbia here. My mom used to always tell me stories of the Nguni, or Bushmen/wild men when I was young. They were people who lived in the forest and took away people who wandered too far out, specifically children. I always figured these stories were created by my people to serve 2 purposes. First, to teach young children to not wander far off, and second, to give explanations to kidnappings done by other tribes, which was a fairly common occurrence even up until the early to mid-20th century. My grandmother's brother was taken by Cree from Alberta and raised by them. They had assumed he had died until decades later when they were reunited and learned what had happened. That owls are a sign of death. My mom won't let anything that has to do with owls in her house because of it. I'm Cherokee, and growing up the Uktena, horned serpent, really freaked me out. The mountain my family lived on has these mysterious glowing lights that, according to legend, was from the Uktena trying to trick people into finding it. There is also Spearfinger, an old lady who can transform into your loved ones and eat your liver. So the first one is called Siat Ko, don't know the translation in English. Lived at this lake and it was his spot. We do not go there or he will kill you. Used to have nightmares about him based on what I was taught as a kid. Like how you could stand at the edge of the water and be looking in and he would come out of it and just grab you. But then the mountain blew up and filled in the lake, so don't know if he's still around or not. The second, I don't remember the name, but translated into English is dangerous being who lives in rivers and drowns people. Anthropologists think it was our way of describing dangerous log jams and whirlpools in our river. The raven is why we have light. He was selfish and greedy and tried to steal the light from a box after tricking a girl into opening the box. The girl's father had raised her to never ever open the box ever. They lived in total darkness, they didn't know what the world or one another looked like, etc. He, the tricky raven, tricked her by masking himself as a person, in a world with only 2 people, and causing the person to fall in love with him. Once the box, containing light, was open, the raven stole it, dropped it, it broke, and Earth got light. I'll find a link to a much more descriptive storytelling. We have a spirit similar in Aboriginal culture. It's called a Mimi spirit. Basically, when you go walk about this spirit, day or night, will try and trick you into following it. It will appear, you walk to it and it's vanished. It will appear again, you again follow it for it to disappear. Repeat this multiple times and you are lost forever. I was 7 when I first actually met an elder whose son was taken by the Mimi spirit. I'll never forget her broken face when she told my class. I don't really know any actual stories well enough to tell, but I know the rules. 1. If you hear someone you know calling your name, but you also know they are not supposed to be there, don't respond. Especially if they are out of sight and insisting you come to them. 2. Always play group games in counterclockwise order, otherwise you're playing with the dead. 2.5. Also, don't eat in the dark, this is considered inviting the dead to eat with you. If you can extend your hand all the way out and still see it clearly, then you're fine. 3. Don't play card games past midnight. If you do, and someone knocks at the door, don't answer it. Try not to drop your cards. If you do, then don't bend down to pick them up, or you will see hooves under the table. That's bad. 4. Say thank you after meals, even if you're the one that made it. Even better if you say it in native tongue. If someone finishes their meal and says, thank you, you say you're welcome, even if you didn't give it to them. Even better in native tongue. 5. Don't try to contact spirits, especially with board games. This is not a tribe custom, it's more of an unspoken common sense among the res people. 6. After someone dies, you should gather family as quickly as possible to have feasts for 10 days. The first dinner is large, then every meal after that is smaller feasts meant for portions of the family to come at different times to help. The last feast on the 10th day is the closing dinner, which is the largest, with the entire family expected to show up and help. For every meal of these 10 days, put out a plate of the deceased's favorite foods first. Contrary to Rule 4, you do not say thank you at any time during these 10 days. This is because it is believed that it takes the dead 10 days to relive their lives before they pass on, so this is your last chance to eat with them. 7. If a bird flies into your house, someone's going to die. 8. Pregnant woman should not hold any child that isn't theirs. 9. It's accepted that if you actually try to curse someone, literally going through all of the steps with the intention of harm, not an accidentally wishing them bad luck, then your family will also be cursed horribly. 10. If you play with fire, you'll wet the bed. I feel like I may be late, but I have a lot of Aboriginal myths. Most are old tales that involve magic or giants, taking animals. Cunning ravens, the birth of the Licho people, but more sinister of tales, the Naga. The Aboriginal version of Bigfoot. I also know of an Inuktitut take about witches that live under the ocean called the Kalapilyut. I'm a Northern Canadian with an Aboriginal father and a white mother. The tales I heard were either from teachers, grandparents, or friends who have embraced their culture. So let me know if you want to hear some stories. Not me, but my fiancée is 50% native. She said that when she was a kid, her mom, who lived and associated with their tribe frequently, was told to take her and her siblings to the storm shelter and to lock the doors because the owls were coming. In her tribe, it is believed that owls were possessed by unkind spirits and would come back to haunt people who had harmed them during their life. Her mom, who was just a child then, had followed her parents' orders and had taken her and her siblings to the shelter, but she hadn't locked the door. She opened the door and above her she saw a swarm of owls flying over her and the other nearby homes that also housed other people of the tribe. She said they all flew past the nearby homes and never saw the occurrence happen again, but until this day her mom gets nervous and uneasy when she sees an owl. I'm Smshin and we seem to have a lot of shapeshifters, which some are questionable. I think a lot of them are similar to the idea of skinwalkers, but some of the shapeshifters, like Raven, have been a huge part of getting the things we need like the moon and stars, although mostly through trickery. I've known some people who swear they've come into contact with shapeshifters that usually end up being like a mimic of someone they know, usually something with them, but are often faceless. There was apparently a ghost war once. Mosquitoes were once a bloodthirsty group of people. Here's a non-scary legend from the Osage, the story of the medicine spider. Long ago, when the people were young, the chiefs of the many clans of the Osage sought out different animals to become symbols of their people, to impart wisdom and strength to them. The chief of the isolated earth, troubled because he had yet to find such an animal, went out hunting for food and a quest for his people's symbol. After he had been hunting for some time, he came across the hoofprint of a massive stag. "Ah," he said, "grandfather dear, reveal yourself to me, so that you may bring your strength to my people," and began to track the stag so that he could take it as a symbol. For many hours he tracked the stag, and gradually the tracks became fresher as he started to catch up. However, he was so focused on following the tracks of the stag that he did not lift his eyes from the ground, and did not notice that his path would lead him directly into a spider's web. The web was massive and strong, and the chief was caught just enough to impede his passage for a moment. In anger, he struck at the spider, but it dodged his blow and scurried out of reach before proceeding to scold him. "Grandson," said the spider, "why do you strike at me when it is your own carelessness that has caused you to walk into my web? What has you so preoccupied that you cannot watch where you are going? Why do you walk as a blind man?" The chief of the isolated earth suddenly felt foolish, but felt compelled to answer the spider. "I was following the tracks of a great stag, so that it can be a symbol of my clan and bring strength to our people." The spider replied that it could be such a symbol, and the chief scoffed at it. "You are such a small, weak thing. How could you bring strength to my people?" The spider answered, "Where I am, I build my home, and where I build my home all things come to it. Should your people learn this patience, they shall become strong indeed." The chief saw the wisdom of this, and went home, satisfied. And so the medicine spider became a symbol for the isolated earth and one of the symbols of the Osage people. Traditionally, the medicine spider is depicted as a stylized black widow from an inland PNW reservation. We have stories of little people, stick Indians, and of course Bigfoot. Little people are garden gnome-sized people that live in the hills and caves and pretty much live their own lives. I can't remember a whole lot of their story/lore. Stick Indians are spirits that take either a blue/green or red light forms. The former are considered good and if you're lost will lead you home to a familiar trail. The latter are evil and will lead you over deadfalls or cliffs and try to hurt you. Everyone knows the Bigfoot stories. The one thing about them that may be unique is that they communicate by beating sticks against trees and hitting rocks together. My favorite stories came from my Navajo friend about skinwalkers. So I know we have the Apache Death Cave. That's actually real though, but it's a great read for people looking for ghost stories. I was told a story by my great-grandmother. A mountain spirit was angry about the way that white men had hurt the land, by breaking the mountains and tainting the waters, so he came up with a plan. He pretended to be a white man, and convinced people he had found a mine. Every day he would appear to be growing richer and richer. Finally, the white men grew greedy and decided to take the mine for themselves, followed the spirit into the mountain. Every day, men would try to follow the spirit into the mountains, but none ever returned. This continued every day, because the white men cared more about the copper than the mountains, lands, and water. It is still happening even today. The spirit takes their bodies somewhere they can never return to the land they abused. There's a pair of legs that always wants to race at night. If you're out on the res after nightfall you're bound to run into the bodiless legs that run the roads around the res. Apparently it will try and trip you to ensure it wins. There are a few others that go around that I'm pretty sure started as someone's grandma's grandma trying to scare kids from doing stuff. I haven't looked into this in years but I was always told to never go into the woods at night as that was when the spirits would roam around. Especially in winter as that was when a giant flying cannibal head would attack, especially people who did bad things. From the Great Lakes region in Canada, supposedly. I'll have to research it to see if it's actually true or something my mother came up with to terrify me. Lol. I'm Cherokee, and my family has always had supernatural things going on. Though there are lots of cool scary stories to tell, one in particular popped up in my head when I read the question. The deer woman. My stepmom always said she was Deer Clan, because of this she never ate any deer whatsoever. I never knew the reason why till after she became extremely ill because my dad tricked her into eating deer jerky one day. She told me that anyone who ate deer in her clan usually gets a warning by getting sick, but if they continued eating deer they would die. This is because the deer woman would come for them, because they had done wrong. Then she went further down the road of making me not eat any jerky for a while by saying, every year a person in her clan is taken by the deer woman. This is at powwows of course, when everyone goes home. You'll hear the next day that someone turned up dead, or went missing never to be found. Is what she told me in between moments of dizziness. I was around 7 or 8 at the time, and her being my stepmom, I thought I was going to die because all I ate was deer jerky that day. I'm Cherokee, so technically Native American speaker. Very technical. However, that has nothing to do with what I'm going to talk about. That was just obligatory. Maybe it's not appropriate, but maybe it is for this Reddit question, I don't know for sure. I'm Hawaiian. Living on the island of Kauai. I've met people on here who've said Hawaiians are Enadav Amy Re Kan Sias Emmer Ika Sion Tr Uls Hai. Sure buddy. Anyway, there's a lot of supernatural and myth here in Hawaii that I thought I might share a bit of. At least the most prevalent kind that I've heard of. Night marchers. Ghostly ancient Hawaiian warriors. You'll hear drums and see torches when they're near. You can't look at them and you should lie on the ground in respect, they'll kill you otherwise. You still can die even if you follow the recommendations. You're most likely to live if you're of Hawaiian descent. If a ghost warrior is a relative, he can call upon the night marchers to spare a descendant's life, and or show absolute respect. Mermaid of Wailua River. She's very much like a siren of sorts. Wailua River is the biggest, in terms of width, on Kauai. She swims in that river and does what one would expect a siren to do. White Man of Waimea Canyon. Basically a small powder white creature that, at night, stalks people. The only story I've heard of it involved the creature jumping on a guy's back and attacking him. Some sort of night creature I forgot the name of. I think it was a sort of one-eyed beast, but I'm not sure. Mythology story of it involved a hunter who stayed out too late so he decided to camp. He sets up a fire and sees the creature across from him. The monster just watches him from across the campfire. This particular monster doesn't like light. The hunter had to sit there and keep the flame lit until morning. When the sun began to rise, the monster left. General ghosts of people that haunt heiaus and gravesites. Heiaus are sacred ancient Hawaiian lands that people cannot tread upon. This is a real rule here. Legends ranging from bad luck, being haunted and more can happen if one treads on sacred land. Especially without respect and Hawaiian descent. My uncle once parked by a river in a hotel with a courtyard that was built upon an ancient gravesite. On that courtyard was a tree. My uncle said he saw people in that tree staring back at him. Anyway, those are just stories at the top of my head. There is a ton of Hawaiian mythology and I'm glad I was able to share some of that. Even if this wasn't exactly a Native American story. Do Inuit count? I'm from the northern Canada, Nunavut. There are shadow figures called Tarayanak or the shadow people. It is believed that you can see them from the corner of your eyesight. When you see a Tarayanak, you would take another look or you swore you saw something in a form of shadow or a haze. I have heard that they are rather creepy and they give you the feeling of being watched or a slight anxious of some is following you. Another legend is called Ijirate, translated people who hide. Ijirate are entities that you would see in the barren Arctic in the far hills. The Ijirate have the power to shapeshift into other creatures or people, really similar to the Navajo legend Skinwalker although never harming Inuit. It is believed that the entities observes Inuit and follow them but I have never heard Ijirate harming Inuit. An Inuk elder explained that the Ijirate can live human lives or imitating humans, or even marry other human beings, while pretending to be Inuit. Camping in the Arctic is creepy and you would have that expectation that you would encounter entities, especially how the Arctic is so vast and empty. Mexican here. We were tribesmen too, we just built a bit of an empire, so I'll tell you the story of the Chinook. These creeps are young children with the faces of old men and not much is known about them. They live in the deserts and jungles of Mexico and the legend goes that if you see one and follow it, you'll lose either 3 or 7 days. My grandfather always told me that if you lose 7 days to a Chinook, they follow you home and they try their absolute best to drive you to insanity, depression, or suicide. If you lose 3 days, it means one of two things will happen. The first is that you'll go to war where you will die a brutal but glorious death. The second is that you will be the victim of great tragedy. Lose your life savings, break both legs, lose family. That sort of thing. If you turn your back on the Chinook, it will transform into a great and terrible jaguar and you'll be devoured. To avoid this fate, you must back away from it, avoiding eye contact at all costs, for if you make eye contact, it will steal your soul. When you can no longer see it, you must pray and pray hard. I'm not quite sure how well this monster is known throughout Mexico or if it's even told the same. But I know that this story has been in my family for generations. My grandfather's grandfather told him. My father's grandfather told him. My grandfather told me. My father will tell my son. And I'll tell my grandson. Yes, in that order. Old traditions, I pray we never see one of these monsters. I'm Métis and an interesting fact that I learned recently was that out in the West when they went on long buffalo hunts and someone died, it was necessary to bring them back to their home community. So let's just say that Grandpa Jean-Baptiste dies on the hunt. They would bury him in a shallow grave with a marker and when the hunt was over they would dig him up, put him under all the hides so the smell of dead Grandpa Jean-Baptiste wouldn't be too bad and they would bring them back to their homeland and give him a proper burial. It was important to them that their dead came back home and were laid to rest with the rest of the family. A lot of them were very Catholic and firmly believed that the dead must be buried on sacred ground or else their souls would wander restlessly. Apparently European settlers and First Nations did not follow this practice. They would bury them where they died. A long time ago there were people who lived around the Inuit. They were big and strong enough to tow multiple kajaks into the wind when it was blowing too hard for the Inuit to row. They disappeared before people came over from Europe. Looking at archaeological evidence, they were probably the last of the Dorset people who the Thule people, the ancestors of modern Inuit, met as they traveled east across the Arctic. I'm half and half Apache and half Cherokee. I know plenty of lore but I have a story about coyotes and shapeshifting that I personally experienced if anybody is interested in hearing it. Alright, it's maybe not the most exciting but here it is. I was living on the res and I was way out in the middle of nowhere, even in res standards. It was nighttime and I was watching the full moon outside. I remember it was so beautifully bright that I could see almost everything. It wasn't uncommon to hear coyotes around here, though you saw them less than you heard them. In spite of this, I saw a few coyotes trotting off a little ways in an opening bathed in the full moon. I remember thinking that they must be up to no good, because coyote is rarely up to any good. Oddly, I didn't hear them, even though coyotes are louder and more talkative when traveling at night. Well, I was gazing out the window near our front door, when I heard my mother calling me from outside. I specifically remember that she said I had left my backpack in the car and needed to get it to do my homework. I thought nothing of it and began to put on my shoes. Suddenly, every hair on my body stood straight up. The air seemed wrong. It was at this time that my mother walked in from the kitchen and said that dinner was almost ready and I needed to wash up. She saw my shoes on, and immediately sensed something wasn't right. She asked if somebody was outside. I said she was. Of course, no she wasn't. She had been in the kitchen the whole time. I took a last look out the window facing the open field, and I saw a coyote waiting in the light of the full moon. It then stood up on its hind legs like a person and walked into the woods. I would stake my life on this story's authenticity. This is also not the only story I have of my parents' voices speaking to me while I'm alone. I come from the Lumbee tribe, which has a lot of controversy to begin with, but I'll share a family story. My great-grandmother was supposedly the local witch doctor in her town for a majority of her life. Growing up, I always thought these sort of stories were total bullshit and just my dad messing with me. He and his family would always say how I was her namesake, and even if I didn't want to accept it, we had some weird synchronicities in our family and assumed it was because of her. The day she passed away, my dad was out in his garden when he immediately stood up and thought he heard her screaming from afar. At the time, he lived in a separate state from her, but the screaming sounded like her voice and it really freaked him out. He goes inside the house to call and check on her when suddenly the phone rings. It's his mother telling him how his grandmother had just passed away and he needs to head home. Another weird thing in our family is that whenever I have a dream with my dad in it, even if he only appears for a brief second, without failure he calls me the next day. Every goddamn time this man is in my dreams, I wake up and know that he'll be calling me sometime that day. Best part? He says the same things happens when I appear in his dreams. Him and I aren't terribly close in the sense that I haven't seen him in person in 2 years and we maybe chat on the phone once a month or so. Granted, it's nothing too spooky, but I always found it really interesting that his family and I have these minor happenings and we usually just chalk it up to being Lumbee ha. Seneca/hatiness on here. Someone posted a few rules, which I've been taught as well. Funerals are kinda scary to me. You're not supposed to go outside, or travel alone, you invite spirits to come with. My grandfather and uncles used to carve false faces too. We have the typical flying heads, little people which are supposed to be kinda good emo, giant snakes, witches, etc. Most stores we don't actually talk about. The scariest one I've heard so far is the combination of shapeshifters/witches. Pronounced ga-hey-nay, these things are evil spirits that roam a specific hill near our res. It's creepy as shit, and fills with fog at night and it's unsettling. I did some research as I was trying to write a script about it, and I found a description of them. They transform into walking disemboweled animals that chase you. I think if anyone was in that area and saw a deer gutted walking in 2 legs towards them they'd shit their pants. I know I would. The croc was a legend amongst the Wani tribe. It's said to take on the appearance of a small lizard-like creature, but approaching it when it sees you causes it to emit a loud, funny scream and take off running at paranormal speeds. If you are able to successfully capture one, by sneaking up behind it and grabbing its tail and mouth at the same time, you will be blessed with a good harvest and immortality. This is extremely local, but there is a huge boulder on the beach in the town I grew up. The local First Nations legend is that on nearby Vancouver Island there was a First Nations chief's daughter who fell in love with an ocean spirit of some sort, and they were going to leave and start their own tribe. So the ocean spirit threw a huge boulder through the air and said they would make their home wherever it landed. It landed on the beach and the local First Nations are their descendants according to the legend. I'm only part Native American, but mostly grew up as a white kid in a white family in rural central Texas. Local legends seem to be a blend of Native American, Hispanic, and white American, and I think they're super interesting. The legends aren't told as much anymore. Only older folk talk about them and no children remember them anymore. I fear they're dying, so here they are. The Duke and Duchess of Harvest are a pair of spirits who protect crops from damage. They're benevolent spirits who do their best to help everybody, but can't always do it all, so you have to do your part in protecting your own crops and helping out your neighbors too so they can help others in greater need. They're honored at the yearly Harvest Festival, with a Duke and Duchess being named from each grade at the local elementary school. The Snatcher, or El Tomador, is an evil spirit who snatches away children and animals that wander too far from their parents. No one has ever seen it. The Old Spirits are a poorly defined group of neutral spirits that just sort of wander around at night. They're the guardians of nature at night, humans get the daytime, the Old Spirits get the nighttime. Their disapproving looks if you're out during darkness give you uneasy feelings. The pumpkin men are human bodies with pumpkin heads that wander vegetable patches at night and either protect the garden or spread disease in them, depending on who you talk to. El Chupacabra exists in many cultures. I don't think there's a big need to talk about it here. This is all I can think of right now. Finally, something I can answer. The Mohawk tribe of the Northeast has some spooky entities, some of which are meant to tell your asshole kids to behave. Longnose, if I can recall, is like reverse Santa. They are creepy skinny figure with the aforementioned body part, and they gather naughty children in a sack to take them away from their families for misbehaving. There's a whole book called When the Chenu Howls that has a handful of Native American horror stories. Nimipu, more popularly known as Nez Perce, here. Coyotes, or as I heard them addressed by my grandmother, Itsiaya, Isayeye, are some real trickster assholes, but they're also integral to our creation. If anyone would like to hear some of our stories, follow this link and perhaps select Coyote Story. This particular story was told by Elizabeth Penny Wilson, may her soul rest in peace, an incredibly strong and wise Nimipu that survived the infamous Carlisle Indian School and persevered until she was 91. As my great-grandmother would say after telling a story, Wako ehq quesix, Wakoetic sukwe sik, now you learned something new. Ojibwe from Ontario, Canada here. One night I was outside really late with two friends on my way home and we all saw a white orb that vaguely resembled a floating paleface in someone's backyard that was coming closer and closer to us, so we hurried home. Told my dad and he said maybe it was a bear walker and someone put a curse on me. I was scared shitless the rest of the night and kept expecting to see a white orb outside my window. There isn't a ton of info on bear walker online or at least not when I last searched it, but more or less it's a evil spirit or wizard. I don't know if it's what I for sure saw that night, but it is something to note. Besides that, I can also think of little people, which others here have discussed, and then one of my friend's grandmas was convinced she saw Bigfoot chasing her truck one night down a long dark road on our res, so there's that. There is definitely more that I'm forgetting, but that's all I can think of for now. Late to the party, Indian time. I'll put a few Ojibwe ones here anyways. 1. Nanabush/Nanabuzu. He is the trickster of the Anishinaabe/Ojibwe/Saltiques people. We greet people by saying buzu. It has a dual meaning as it's more of a question than greeting. When we say buzu, we are asking if you know the stories of Nanabuzu, or our trickster. The next meaning is we are asking if we are talking to Nanabuzu himself. He can take many forms and shapeshift, so he may be trying to trick us. The idea is that we should be respectful and polite to everyone because we never know if Nanabuzu is present. 2. Miss Sabe or Sabe, Miss Sabe, loosely translated it means he who peeks. It is our word for Bigfoot. According to our elders, the noun is an old Ojibwe word that predates contact with European people. Note, the Lone Ranger is nicknamed Kimosabe by Tonto, or he is peeking. The word is thought to be an algic term. 3. Mamegwesi, Mamegwese, or the little people, little tiny people who like sweets, metal object, and will play tricks on you if you don't make an offering to them, when they are thought to be present. They dress in camouflaged clothing and can be seen by children. My cousin claims to have seen and played with them when she was very small. 4. Mishibij for the water panther, Mishibishi, live in big lakes and rivers. They have been known to eat people and animals. Some bodies of water are known to be off limits because of the fear to this animals. I haven't heard any tribe stories from my tribe. I'm Seminole, am actually still researching my tribe and getting into it more and more. But if anyone knows any stories about Seminoles, please share and enlighten me. Smile. Is anyone a member of a Pacific Northwest tribe that has a story about a forest creature that has a lot of teeth and clacks them at you? I think it might be a Quileute legend. One of my Ling profs did research up there and relayed that one to me. I always wanted to read more about it. He said he used to sit on his porch with a beer after work and listen for teeth sounds in the trees, lol. Apsa, look here. I see a lot of other tribes with similar stories regarding little people and Bigfoot. We also have a local legend of the Goat Man. From what I know, this particular spirit/demon/creature has only been a recent phenomenon. Maybe started to appear in the last 20 years? Anyway, there is man who has the upper body of an adult male, but the lower body of a goat. He likes to hitchhike and get in vehicles and tries to steal children. A lot of sightings near the Lodge Grass/Benteen area and also in the Busby area as well. We also have the story of the witch who lives in the Pryor Mountains south of Billings, who helps you with your life's problems, but first must take a finger as payment. I will ask my Kale, grandmother, for more. Walking Sam skulks in the shadows of the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota and convinces people to commit suicide, especially young people. He's 7 feet tall, very thin and has no mouth. When he stretches out his long arms, nooses hang down with Lakota children hanging from them. Walking Sam finds you when you're alone and puts thoughts in your head until you feel worthless and kill yourself. Sometimes Walking Sam is depicted looking like Abraham Lincoln, complete with the stovepipe hat. Walking Sam, Uncle Sam, I don't know if that's where the name came from. But Walking Sam is an evil infected upon the people when the Ossaty-Sacoin were forced onto the reservations. He isn't a legend of the people before Pine Ridge Reservation existed. Lincoln was president when the Lakota were being forced onto reservations. Lincoln also ordered the execution of 38 Lakota men the day after Christmas in 1862. It's the largest mass execution in U.S. history. I always thought Walking Sam was Lincoln. They carved his face onto Shakpe Tukasi in the Pahasapa. Mount Rushmore was 6 grandfathers in the Black Hills. My father attended Holy Rosary boarding school at Pine Ridge in the 1940s and 1950s, but our people didn't live on the reservation. My grandmother said evil stalked the people there. My father never wanted us to ever even visit any of our cousins or his uncles there. Misbehaving children are told that they better behave or scary man will come and get them. This is usually told to children in public and the scary man is just some rando stranger. Not supernatural or anything, but it's funny looking back on it now that I'm older. Not Native American, just Gaelic. The Giant's Causeway is a pretty cool one. An Irish giant and a Scottish giant got into a fight. The Irish one got fucking wrecked and ran over the causeway, a bunch of rocks connecting the two places, and dressed like a baby and had his wife pretend nurse him. The giant comes over and thinks to himself, if the baby's that feckin' big he's gun bay an absolute you net when he grows up. So the Scot runs away destroying the causeway. A Lakota story is the man with no face, he's like a boogeyman. The story goes that long time ago in a village, there was this very handsome young man. Many girls from different tribes wanted to be with him, and because of that he grew up to be very obnoxious. He became so ignorant that he would make fun of this old medicine man, calling him ugly whenever he got the chance. One day the old man said, "Before I leave die, I will take your face as my own. You will forever wander looking for it." The young man laughed and called the old man foolish. Within the next few weeks, the old man dies and fulfills his promise. When the young man woke up he couldn't see or anything. When he reaches to feel his face, he feels nothing but smooth skin where his face would be. Yelling but no one hears him, soon the village finds out and chases him off. He now roams the prairie looking for a replacement face. My uncle once told me that he heard this man speak in a ceremony. While it's not good to talk about what goes on in them, I can say this much. The man with no face told everyone that when you're growing up and your parents or grandparents tell you to stay under a meter light or else you're open for him to take you. Also, we're told no to whistle at night because it calls spirits. He is one of them and he looks at it as an invite to take your face if it suits him, or he'll take you with him as he does to anyone that breaks these rules. Now I always break the latter rule and take my chances. But never know till it happens to you. I'm wondering if you could give me some advice on researching Native American ancestry. I'm English and my wife is part Native American. Her grandfather came over during the war and stayed. I'm not sure if he was full or half, but my wife's mom looks very Native American. My wife not so much, and when my first son was born he could have been Native American. Black hair, red skin and just looked as I'd expect. But then slowly turned blonde and now looks like me. Sorry son, I've 2 boys and we've given them Native American middle names as my wife's granddad wanted my wife's middle name to be Rain. Unfortunately Hank died when she was young, so we can't find out anything about her heritage, which she is proud of but until now been unable to find anything about. Hank last name was Lalonde, not sure how you spell it. My wife thinks his tribe settled in Canada, but this is all we know. Any information from anyone would be really appreciated. I mean this in the nicest way possible, but isn't this kind of a ducking, patronizing way to ask the question? Hey Christians, what magical powers did your magic Jesus guy have? What made up stuff do you believe? It's so ridiculous, tee-hee. Not trying to bust your balls, but it's just kinda insane the way in which we kinda approach things. Native stories are always viewed as myths and creation legends, while many in the US pretend like the Bible is in any way more true. It obviously is not. It's equally as likely, if not more so, that coyote actually threw the stars in the sky as it is that Jesus transmuted liquids, walked on water, and was resurrected. It's sort of a built-in arrogance to view any other beliefs or spiritual paths as legends and stories without viewing your own religious beliefs the same, because they have equal weight and proof. Hell, at least the native stories were passed from person to person, not rewritten by a king because he wanted a divorce, or retrofitted in the 60s to target gays. Check books.google.com for some Bibles from 1900, 1800, etc. You'll notice the few eponymous passages referring to homosexuality are slightly different. How odd. And just to be clear, this isn't a lol atheism post, this is basically that you should treat others' religious beliefs or histories with the same respect you expect your own to receive. If you don't want Jesus written into a book of dumb, ridiculous, made-up stories that are hilariously fake like we tend to portray native beliefs or other cultures' religions, then maybe be a little mindful.